Hi everyone, Miss Gooch here, and I'm going to talk to you today about the poem Kamikaze by Beatrice Garland. So, Kamikaze pilots were Japanese soldiers who crashed their planes into enemy warships, killing themselves in the process. So essentially they were sent on suicide missions. And the word kamikaze, it translates to mean divine wind. Now, divine means godly. And in Japanese culture, that's really how these soldiers were seen, because it was the highest possible honour to be chosen and trained to die for your country, which for us probably seems like unbelievable now, but that was the whole propaganda, that was the whole culture in Japan at the time. And the poem explores the speaker's grandfather's experience of being a kamikaze soldier. So it's a little bit confusing because the person speaking in the poem is talking about her mother telling them about the mother's father. So they're listening to the mother tell a story about the grandfather. And in this story, the grandfather decides to turn his plane around, and when he returns home, he's totally ignored by his family, the neighbours, then his wife, the children, because, as I said, it was the highest possible honour to be a kamikaze soldier, so to actually turn around was the most dishonourable thing that you could do. So how does this poem link to power and conflict? So the poem explores the power of nature, and it also explores the power of society's expectations on people through the way that the grandfather was recruited, and also through the way that he's then treated when he turns his plane around. So let's read the poem together. Her father embarked at sunrise with a flask of water, a samurai sword in the cockpit, a shaven head full of powerful incantations, and enough fuel for a one-way journey into history. But halfway there, she thought, recounting it later to her children, he must have looked far down at the little fishing boats strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea, and beneath them, arcing in swathes, a huge flag waved first one way, then the other in a figure of 8, the dark shoals of fishes flashing silver as their bellies swiveled towards the sun. I remembered how he and his brothers, waiting on the shore, built cairns of pearl-grey pebbles to see whose withstood longest the turbulent inrush of breakers, bringing their father's boat safe, yes, grandfather's boat, safe to the shore, salt-sodden, awash with cloud-marked mackerel, black crabs, feathery prawns, the loose silver of whitebait, and once a tuna, the dark prince, muscular, dangerous. And though he came back, my mother never spoke again in his presence, nor did she meet his eyes. And the neighbours too, they treated him as though he no longer existed. Only we children still chattered and laughed, till gradually we too learnt to be silent, to live as though he had never returned, that this was no longer the father we loved. And sometimes, she said, he must have wondered which was the better way to die. So, powerful stuff. Let's start breaking it down into chunks to make sure we understand what's happening in each part. So, starting with this first stanza, we learn about what he was doing. So, in his cockpit, he's got a flask of water. The samurai sword, which you see in the image, that was there in case the mission didn't kill the soldier, so they kept the samurai sword in the cockpit of the plane so that they could kill themselves rather than become a prisoner of war, which is pretty brutal. And the word incantation, actually, it means spell or chant. So there's this idea that to become a kamikaze soldier, you have to kind of be under a spell. And this part here says, they were told that they were going to go into the history books. It was a one-way journey into history. You'll be remembered forever. You'll go down in history. That's how they persuaded these men to become kamikaze soldiers. And then, because obviously no one spoke to the father again, and the grandfather again, the only thing the mother can do is guess what went through his head while he's in the plane. So that part there where it says, but halfway there she thought... that phrase there, it tells us she doesn't know for sure. She never spoke to her father again. So only when she's thinking about it later to tell her children about it, that's when she thinks about what he might have been thinking. And she says maybe he looked down and saw the little fishing boats strung out like bunting. So bunting's the stuff that you have at a party, in the image there. And maybe he looked out and he saw the fishes moving one way and the other, like a flag, and then maybe he saw how they turned towards the sunlight. So all this beautiful image of nature, he's looking out, and she's imagining that it was that changed his mind, along with starting to think about his memories. So she's saying maybe he remembered how he and his brothers used to do all these things together. They used to wait for their father's boat when he came in from fishing for the day, and then we have this moment here where she's like, oh yeah, you're right, grandfather's boat. So you can imagine that they're having this conversation as a family. They're re-going over their family history, and then the mother lists all the different fish that the grandfather used to collect, or used to see when his father was fishing. So it suggests that they did have a relationship before he went off to be a kamikaze soldier, because he must have told her about all of these memories, which she's now thinking about now. There's the tuna. And then we have this section here that you can see it's in italics, so it means that it's like slightly slanted, and this is the mother now speaking directly about her father. So she's saying, my mother, so your grandmother, never spoke again in his presence. So everybody around this kamikaze soldier who's returned was silent. They're just outraged, they're disgusted with him. Not the children, but then they just see all the other adults acting in that way, and they learn to be silent as well. And it ends with this really sad sort of image that actually, would he have been better off dying? He would have been remembered in a much nicer way, and maybe he would have been treated better if he was dead, which is a really sad image to end the poem on. So let's return to these central arguments. The poem definitely explores the power of nature, because it's nature that actually allows, it's nature that the mother thinks might have helped to change his mind. And it also explores the power of society's expectations on both the father and the family when he returns. So let's have a look at some of the language analysis in a little bit more detail. So in that opening stanza, if we're thinking about the power of society's expectations, we have this image of the shaven head. So that's not uncommon to happen to soldiers, to have their head shaved. It's for practical reasons, it stops things like light as well. But it also, when we think about it, it takes away part of his identity. So for them now, he's just another soldier. He's disposable. He doesn't really matter. Everybody's uniform to look the same means they're not individuals anymore. And then we can think about these powerful incantations. As I said, that magical spell or chant and it does suggest that he's under a spell cast by those in power. We probably know about the propaganda that they used in Britain, all those posters that were pointing and telling men they had to go to war. That's a similar thing to what would be happening here, that idea of forcing men in a way to go to war by telling them how brave and how amazing they'll be, by, you'll be a real man if you go to war, you'll be remembered forever. So just sort of reinforcing those stereotypes of a man. And then at the end, we see the power of society's expectations on the family, because the children, they slowly but surely, they learn to be ashamed of their father. So you see how the children will follow their adults' behaviour to the point where they'll stop speaking to their own father. And, it highlights the pressure that the children felt not to speak out. They had no voice because of the dishonour that the father had done. And it also shows you how shame and, behaviour can be passed from generation to generation. So now let's have a look at the power of nature. So this image here with the fishes arcing in swathes like a huge flag. I really like that simile, because you could see this as the father seeing signs in nature, and it could be that the flag has been hung out in celebration, so he's looking down and he's seeing this beautiful celebration of life. Or it could be linked to surrendering. You know, if you wave a white flag, it means you're giving up. So he's looking down and he's seeing a flag being waved. He's thinking, I think I'm going to give up this mission. So he sees all these different signs that he should turn around in nature, or that's what the mum thinks he might have seen. And again, we see another sign here with the fish, their bellies flashing silver. So flashing makes it seem like the fish were trying to get his attention, and then silver has connotations, so makes you think of something precious and valuable, like the grandfather's life is precious and valuable. And these fishes are turning towards the sun. So we know that the sun is the source of all light. So you could say these fishes are turning towards the sun, they're choosing life, and that's what the grandfather should do as well. So let's finish by thinking about the structure of the story. So I already said that it's quite complex, where you have the speaker of the story is the grandchild telling the story of the mother, telling them about the grandfather. So where it says, yes, grandfather's boat. And he must have wondered which was the better way to die. There's a few ways of reading about this, of interpreting this. So we could firstly think, well, this could show the mother's regret for never hearing the father's story. So now she only has to imagine it for herself. So she's guilty. So she's trying to piece together the memories that he might have had to try and make herself feel less guilty. It could maybe suggest that the silence lasted for the remainder of the father's lifetime and he was never forgiven, which is a really sad thing to think about. And it shows how ideas about war have changed with time. So it reflects the conflicting feelings about kamikaze soldiers in modern Japanese culture. You have the older generation who still believe that they were heroes and, these figures that should go down in history. But then some of the younger generation think, what a waste of a life. That was... And you have this kind of conflict between the young and the old. And I think that's partly maybe what the mother and then the speaker, the mother's child, is starting to move towards. Having a more sympathetic view of him shows how ideas about kamikaze soldiers are changing over time. And now it's over to you. It's time to test your knowledge. So pick one of the essay questions below and answer it using the quotations that I've explored in the video. So how does Garland convey the power of nature? How does Garland show the power of society's expectations? Or, if you want to challenge yourself, to what extent does Garland present regret and guilt? So answer one of these questions, hand it in to your teacher, and tune in for the next video.